Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Focus on Friday, the 7th of February. We seem to be trundling through the year very quickly into February already. Welcome to this podcast where we look at education issues. Obviously, smart curriculum. Our focus is on curriculum and its delivery and the way that we put schools together, but some of the conversations have been broader. We've just been through a series on inclusion, speak to some really interesting guests. This morning, my guest is Andrew Chubb. I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk about his journey in a second, but just one thank you for being here. Sorry, we're a little bit late, some technical issues, just getting things together, but we're here and we'll be talking for the next hour. Just the usual social media stuff. If you're here with us, do like and share if you're able to. We know that there'll be some new guests around this morning. Certainly this week has been very active and talked to lots of people about sharing here. So welcome if you're new and this is the first one. Go and have a look at some of the previous episodes. If you're on YouTube, thank you for joining the Smart Curriculum Network. Please do subscribe and again share if you're there. It really helps us in terms of getting the message out that we're going to talk to you. And I hope the conversation this morning is really going to get your brain thinking about some of the things that are going on in the system and what we're doing to serve our young people well and certainly serve them for their futures. Anyway, that brings me to this point of introducing Andrew. Andrew, welcome to Friday Focus.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for inviting me on. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And I know it's your first podcast, so I mean, I'd say to everybody, this is a conversation. So although we're in different parts of the country, we've got an hour just to sort of chat and talk about Sister. I'm really interested to hear your journey. So tell me, what brings you to the table? Tell us about your career and where you got to and why you're sitting here.
Okay, well, I decided to go into teaching in my mid-20s, and I started my teaching life in what would I think now be described as a highly challenging school in the middle of Birmingham. And to be honest, it was a bit like trying to learn how to drive in a Ferrari, where I was trying to get my subject matter together and also learn behavior management, and it was all very difficult. I came to the conclusion that although my passion was to work with the most disadvantaged children in society, and there were a lot of them in that school, I wasn't really doing very well. And so I came to the conclusion at that point, right, I needed to change. And I almost left teaching, but I thought, no, I'll try again. And so I moved to another school. And after a couple of years, I'd got my confidence back and I'd learnt a lot more about not only how to teach languages, which was my stock in trade, but also about behavior management and pastoral systems and so on. And so at that point, I was ready to go back into more challenging schools again, which I did. And anyway, I eventually ended up as cutting through many years. I ended up as a head teacher of a school in a very difficult part of Leamington Spa. And that was interesting because it was a school into which many children had been allowed to drift. I think it would be fair to say that other head teachers were very glad when my predecessor had just allowed a whole load of difficult children to come into the school. But needless to say, the school was failing badly. And it took a couple of years, but after a couple of years, that school had been turned around. I had an excellent management team, an excellent leadership team. And overall, after 4 years there, we had what was a very good school. But it had come at a price. And the price was one of inclusion. And I did actually tot up the number of permanent exclusions I had to do to turn that school around because there was very little funding and our curriculum options were really quite limited. And this was one of the times when or perhaps the first time I'd very much come to terms with the fact that if you don't have an appropriate curriculum for your children, for the young people in the school, then you're going to have problems. And so we had a very, very high permanent exclusion rate and a high exclusion rate. Anyway, then the opportunity arose. And I should say at the time, by the way, that we had a very good Ofsted report, and that didn't bother Ofsted at that point. And I think one of the things that it would be interesting to discuss is the role of Ofsted in the system. But anyway, then an opportunity came to lead an academy in Hull, and I was absolutely delighted, because this was perhaps in the heyday of the Labour academies in 2008, and there was a lot of funding available to relaunch what was Archbishop Thurston Academy and became Archbishop Centenary Academy. It was sponsored by the Church of England and what was then the Primary Care Trust. And there was a promise of a new building, as was the case in those days, 3 years after we'd started. So in 2008, I took up post as principal of the newly launched Archbishop Centenary Academy in East Hull. Now, that was just a wonderful experience. And going back to my first job, it was exactly where I wanted to be. The deprivation statistics were that it was, I think, of the 33,000 wards there are also on the Adachi scale, we were number 30, which put us in the top 1% most deprived communities in the country. It was a large, comprehensive. Ultimately, it was about 1,400 young people. There was no sixth form. And it was about as deprived as you get in the UK, I think. And absolutely wonderful children who, at the time of it becoming an academy, it would be fair to say, didn't have the best curriculum. Anyway, when I'd started, I determined that I would not have a high exclusion rate, and that we were going to solve problems through an excellent pastoral system and an excellent curriculum. And so we used the government funding that was it was generous, it has to be said, to have a completely revised curriculum in the school. And we started with the basis of what do our children actually need. And needless to say, it wasn't what has become the English Baccalaureate. And in fact, we developed our own baccalaureate, which we called the Modern Baccalaureate, ModBac, and that became the driving philosophy of our curriculum. So we were judged to be very successful by Ofsted right up until 2016. In 2014, Ofsted loved what we were doing, and we carried on. And then, sadly, the goalposts changed, and this was when Mr. Gove decided a number of things, but perhaps two of the most important ones were that BTECs and other vocational qualifications weren't going to count in school tables, and secondly, that schools were only going to be allowed to count the exam results from the first entry that any child had taken. Now, I can remember very, very clearly and vividly the decision we took as a leadership team, and I take full responsibility for this, because the buck stopped with me. But we decided not to change, because we knew that the strategies that we had were working very, very well with our young people. We had a thriving sixth form, which we built up from nothing. We had children going off to university. We had children going into successful jobs and apprenticeships or into further study. Our NEETs, the not in employment educational training figure, was low. Our exclusions for any school, but particularly for a school of that type, were incredibly low. It was a very happy school. And it was a case of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, the government had other ideas. And I should add that one of the things we discovered was that GCSEs certainly needed to be taken more than once by our particular young people who had no history of exams. Many of the families that they came from didn't really value that sort of education. And so they needed more than one bite of the cherry. Now, we carried on with that. And because of that, obviously, although the final figures were broadly similar, the first entry figures were very low. And so Ofsted, about 2 years later, caned us for doing exactly what we'd done, which had made us so successful prior to that. So by that time, we were a multi-academy trust. We had primary schools. We'd set up our own alternative provision academy, which was incredibly successful. I think it was probably, if not the largest in the country, it was 150 young people at the start. I think and it quickly grew to over 200. I had an exceptionally talented, exceptionally able head teacher there who was running it, and who did a brilliant job. And so, by all accounts, we were very successful, except that we had stuck to our guns on curriculum policy, exam entry policy, and hadn't bended and hadn't, if you like, bowed the knee to what I thought was really not in young people's best interests. Anyway, in 2016, we were punished for that, and we spent the next couple of years getting to a point where Ofsted would say, "Yeah, okay, you've complied," and I can't, hand on heart, say that we'd improved, because actually, I don't think we had really. We'd complied. We'd complied with what the metrics said we had to do, and this carried on. And in 2020, I retired. In fact, I was going to retire at Christmas of 2020, and they couldn't find anybody who wanted my job. So I said, well, look, I'll stay on for another 6 months, but then I really am going. And so finally I retired in the summer of 2020, excuse me, and started to do other things. But bringing right up to this point, I'd always had at the back of my mind that there was a book to be written on this. And I'm sure Yannick will talk about the thinking behind what the decisions I'd made during my time as a principal and CEO. But I decided to write a book because it struck me when I look back on my time as principal that the legislation that the government had brought in hadn't really, well, it had started. I tried very, very hard to unpick Gove's thinking, because on the one hand, he set up free schools and we benefited from that. I was always actually very grateful to the free school program because that enabled us to set up an alternative provision academy.
Yeah.
But what I couldn't get my head around was Gove's thinking on why essentially an English baccalaureate highly academic curriculum was what should be effectively, whatever the government said, imposed on all children. And the only thing I could really come up with was that it was an idea based on equality of opportunity. The thinking perhaps being, well, unless everybody from whatever their background has got the opportunity to study the sort of subjects that will get them into a Russell Group university, then we're, to quote the awful phrase, we're just falling victim to the soft bigotry of low expectations. So I think
in your book, yes, that's quite a statement, isn't it? It's
well, yes, and it was one I disagreed with because we didn't have any low expectations, but the philosophy of our curriculum was based on notions of equity. And I think what policymakers have done over the years, if I might suggest, is that they've confused equality of opportunity for equity. And what equity is about removing barriers to learning so that any young person, regardless of their starting point, can go on and lead a full and successful life. Now, for some, that might be going to a Russell Group university, and some of ours did. For others, it isn't. And when you are from a background or an area where actually there's zero interest in the sort of curriculum which Michael Gove espoused, then you can, for some people, just end up trying to bang a square peg in a round hole. And so I wanted to draw attention to this in a book, because I couldn't find evidence of anything other than sort of academic papers written on this. And so in the book, I came up with a number of criticisms of policy and a number of solutions for how to fix this for free.
Andrew, before you go, let me. I just wanted. So you've referred to the book, and I'm going to put it on the screen, if I may, just so that people can see what you're referring to. So this is your book called Nailed: The Failures of the Government Policy from 2010 onwards, and how to fix them for free. So I mean, that'll ring to the ears of every educator at the moment who's finding a difficulty finding funds. It was available as a paperback and previously as an ebook. So if you obviously this is taken from Amazon. If you want to get a copy, please just note what's there on screen. I will refer to it again later. Andrew, it's great to talk to you. Two, you referred to a gentleman who was at Secretary of State at the time. It isn't just about Michael Gove and his tenure, because actually there are people that have followed and replicated it, and obviously that thinking has dissipated. And from a government point of view, that's success for them. They came up with a policy and they delivered it consistently across many departments, of which Ofqual, Ofsted, and so on, supported that idea. The thing that you talk about your curriculum. I'm not playing devil's advocate, because I agree with you absolutely entirely. And having worked in an area, South Essex, in East Basildon, I know in our conversations we resonate with each other about the kind of learners, the aspirations for curriculum, the aspirations for future education, further and higher education. We're so similar in the sense of that goal and what the curriculum provided. I'm just interested in what you said a moment ago about this. Curriculum was the reason. It's the social contract that gets people to come to a free education service. They come because they see it as valuable, and it's investing in their children. But the curriculum that we have in place is validated at two levels. Ofqual only allows certain qualifications to be on the framework. So there's a government organisation that are validating what we deliver, and then Ofsted are validating that they are there and they're being delivered. So in a sense, the fact that we had, and I tend to use the word technical qualifications rather than, so I won't focus on BTEC because there are many other versions in the basket. You use that to great advantage with your schools. Now, obviously, our conversation here at the moment in this regard is quite secondary, although your MAT became an aspiration for children, that equity of opportunity right from early years through to, and as you say, you created a sixth form. I'm just summing that journey. Yeah. Tell us a bit about this modern baccalaureate. What was the kind of details of it? What was your aspiration? What did the curriculum look like for children's experience?
Well, I think the first thing to say is our modern baccalaureate had effectively three sections, and this was the sort of the guiding philosophy of what we were doing. Firstly, it wasn't that we didn't value academic qualifications. Of course we did, but we were rigorous on that. But we didn't insist that they were all exam based at the end. And so our program was obviously wanted students to do, young people to do English, maths, science, and so on. But science could have been a GCSE. It could have been that would have been potentially a BTEC. And it was indeed for many of our young people. We had a raft of other qualifications which would have fallen into the vocational category. So, for example, we had an arts award, which I developed with another colleague at another school, which had GCSE equivalency, which many found incredibly motivating and led to many going on to careers in the arts. We had a fully working garage, effectively mechanics, for teaching motor vehicle maintenance, and just a little vignette there. One of the lads who in the school, who was incredibly difficult to contain, loved motor vehicle mechanics. Now, under any other circumstances, he would have been expelled, and I can still remember his name. But I used to let the students service my car or work on my car under the supervision of the motor vehicle engineer teacher there. And I let this guy, who who was on the point of being expelled. I think we had got him on a part-time timetable to try and keep him in the academy. But I let him fix my brakes on my car, and he actually made them work better than they had been for some time.
Yeah.
And we managed to include him. So motor vehicle maintenance was another one.
But okay, can I just, Andrew, so building credibility and building reputation is something that we don't discreetly teach children, but actually what you've just described is a young person building his own credibility. I can fix this, and the head teacher's going to drive his car, and he's going to be safe.
Yeah.
That's a powerful message to be working through with children, isn't it?
It is. And the sad thing is that I know now that it's no longer taught. And the reason it's no longer taught is because it doesn't count. And so, I mean, I'll carry on with the mod back.
Sorry, I interrupted you. That's a powerful message there.
But one of the things that struck me very much, which I've been reflecting on when we were talking about this before the show, was what you said about compliance. I wrote this quote down, which was, no, I can't find the quote, but I think you said that there's a danger at the moment that compliance is that success is measured in terms of compliance, not necessarily what's best for the young people. And the fact that motor vehicle engineering had to be dropped, because not by me, I have to say, but subsequently it had to be dropped because it didn't count, is a very good illustration of that. How actually compliance has got in the way of success. But on top of a core academic curriculum made up of a range of qualifications, both taught by terminal exam, if need be taken more than once, and by a portfolio of work, we wanted to make sure that students had some kind of an international experience. And now that was particularly important in our area because it was so deprived, and lots of children hadn't gone out of East Hull into West Hull, let alone other areas of the country or abroad. And so we had an exchange program, for example, with a school in Beijing, and one of the things we set up was Mandarin Chinese, lest anybody think we're falling victim to the bigotry of soft bigotry of low expectations. We wanted our young people to do an extended project. We wanted them to engage in some community service, because education isn't just about your success; it's about what you can contribute to the wider community. We wanted them to have a personal challenge. We wanted them to have an IT award of some description. We wanted them to have good work experience, and we also wanted them, and this is absolutely critical in our area, to understand personal finance, because debt was a massive problem. And so basically looking at our community, that was what our community's young people needed to be successful, and for school to be meaningful and relevant, and to prepare them for life. Now, if I go down that list, what has to go to comply with Progress 8? And I'll read it out. Anything that isn't measured by GCSE, which, by the way, only 70% of young people can pass, and that is fixed pretty much by Ofqual. So you're consigning straight away 30% of all young people nationally not to get at least a level 4. Internationalism, well, good luck with that. An extended project, if you remember the EP, not really much time for that. Community service, no, sorry, they've got to be in classrooms the whole time. A personal challenge, well, perhaps a personal challenge would be how on earth to put up with a curriculum that doesn't interest you really very much for 50% of the time. That would be a challenge. An IT award, maybe. Personal finance, there's an excellent course on personal finance. That had to go because that took curriculum time. Work experience, not much time for that anymore. And so what you are left with is an impoverished curriculum. It's a real shame that I think that schools now have to basically fill the Progress 8 buckets, or else.
I'll just let that pause for a second, because several other conversations that I've had with educators, Andrew, we've talked about this. Is measurement, what we're measuring, is that really the sum total. Somebody said to me, and is the sum of the parts a whole education? And the truth is, what we've come to is that exactly as you've just described, a terminal examination, a number, grade, whatever it might be, is the sum of those of full education. And what you've described is a richer, broader provision, which is setting children up for a life. Go on. You.
Well, I was thinking of another analogy about this. If anybody has driven a modern car recently, i.e. one made in the last couple of years, then you're probably really frustrated, as I am, by the amount of binging and bonging and braking all of a sudden that happens. And so I've just bought a car recently. I didn't want any of these bings and bongs, but to my utter frustration, I have to turn them off each time I turn the engine on. Otherwise, it's going to shout at me whenever it thinks that I've broken the speed limit, and it makes mistakes on that, I would say, because it can sometimes pick up signals from another speed limit. Yeah. And or it'll try and grab the steering wheel out of my hands when it thinks I'm going over a white line, even if there isn't one there, without indicating first. And all this is because of a system called NCAP. NCAP, the new car assessment program, the European version thereof. And what NCAP does is it says you have to have all these things on it if it's going to get a 5-star rating. So my car has got a 5-star rating for NCAP, but I end up disabling everything, and I've paid for all this stuff that I absolutely don't want. Now, worse than that, when I was looking at buying a car, I thought, I'll get a Dacia Duster, because I didn't need anything posh. It's a very good car, very well reviewed in many ways. I read a Which report of the Dacia Duster, and it said, do not buy this car. And yet the #1 best-selling car in Europe is the Dacia Duster. And but the reason Which says, do not buy this car, it's unsafe, is because it hasn't got all the bings and bongs and bangs on it, and it doesn't try and grab the steering wheel out of your hand. And NCAP is a really good example, I think, of cars that have got a 5-star NCAP rating, have got one because they've got all this stuff on that anybody I know turns off straight away, and it adds to the price and actually makes it worse from many people's point of view. And it's not a perfect analogy, but I kind of think there's an element of that's where Progress 8 has got us. And indeed, all Ofsted do, as you said right at the beginning, is they validate or not what they've been told to look at. And so whilst I've had my own run-ins with Ofsted, I think it's unfair to blame them for everything, because actually they are, as I said, they're validating what the government has said they've got to validate. Now,
just on that, Andrew, I mean, a lot of people, you and I have been around the education service long enough to know life before Ofsted.
Yeah.
And Ofsted was introduced under an Act of Parliament to deliver the national curriculum, to ensure that the national curriculum was in place. So in exactly as you've just said, it's not about obviously this week and the announcement of the grade, I think we've got very lost on this grading, although I agree absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure that the 5 words that we now are going to end up with are any different than the 4 that we had previously, and they will become they'll become what we had. And I think there's a missed opportunity here, genuinely. And I'm not being critical. I'm being an observer of the system, and a participant in the system. I don't think it's looking at what we need in the system.
No.
And exactly what we're saying. Are the children getting a rich and broad experience that sets them up for a life, which is what your intent was in all that you've done? And Andrew, I was really, where you started in Birmingham and that sort of goal, I know, because I identify with it. I enjoyed working in schools in challenging circumstances. I worked in rich, affluent schools and actually found it quite demoralizing. I've got money, I don't care. Parents going to get me a job, I don't need this. That's not the ethic that we were used to. We were about community transformation, giving children a future. Melanie, thank you. I know, Melanie, you're listening to the show, and thank you for being with us this morning. Andrew, she's asked a very interesting question. How did you keep your decorum, given what you've just said about your run-ins with Ofsted? Let's give Melanie an answer. What is it that kept you sane and stable through that journey? Because it must have been a challenge sometimes, Andrew.
Yes, it was. we well, I used to play a game with my leadership team playing called Spot the Silver Lining, and the aim of the game was just to point out that no matter how bad the situation was, there was always a silver lining. And I think
Mm.
we got through pretty much every single problem by finding a silver lining somewhere. There was the odd one which we didn't, but no, I mean the truth is, I absolutely loved the children the young people that we worked with. I had a fantastic staff. We actually had, you know, a lot of fun, and I think schools should be fun places. Fun doesn't mean lack of rigor. The school was it genuinely was a family setup, and we knew that we were part of a community that cared for each other. The young people cared for us actually very much, and you know they really appreciated. This may sound like I'm speaking through rose-tinted glasses, but it wasn't the case. It was. I think I would stand by the fact it was a happy family, as given that it was a place of work, obviously, and study. But and so we were, you know, we became pretty resilient, and you know, just took the knocks as they came. So decorum wasn't a problem, and I just remember sort of through gritted teeth after when the inspectors, who didn't really like what we were doing, left, I wished them a safe journey home and said goodbye. And I just thought, well, there's very little to be gained by losing your decorum, I think. So you just have to fight on. And we were very resilient. We just kept going. And the other thing I'd say is we had the most supportive group of governors and directors, and you know, and Archbishop Sentamu himself. I have to pay huge credit to the directors of the Academy and the Trust, who were incredibly supportive, who fully understood what we were trying to achieve, and who were behind that. So I think that was the way. I never felt alone. I felt that you know, we were just going through everything we went through together, and that really helped.
Yeah, and I think that we need to say that, you know, and I'm going to emphasise it. You know, for the MATs and the organisations around the country, they are supported by, you know, people in the community, directors, members, and so on, and they will stand up to quite a lot of that pressure to be compliant. Where we're, you know, and Andrew, that's where I want to kind of move into the you know, what you've talked about Ofsted. You mentioned earlier about that, you know, the equity of provision, you know, and I suppose the challenge that we both experienced, and many are experienced, is this drive to one size, one shape fits everybody. The system has had some freedoms, as you've expressed, with the free schools and the AP that you designed and created and ran very successfully. The truth is, one size doesn't fit all.
No.
We've got Michaela schools in the system where it's very academic and, you know, very compliant. We've got APs where things are quite different, and obviously they have different performance measures, a bit legacy to the old best five, but that's a, you know, we remember those. What did it feel like in the sense of setting up? What was your ambition around the AP and that goal of creating something different?
Well, it was clear to us. It became clear to me that even though we had a very diverse curriculum, and which we did for the first sort of 3 or 4 years of our setup as an academy, and even when we moved into our new building and we had the most wonderful facilities. And by the way, that really did help us. I can't pretend that it didn't. So we were very fortunate to have that money, and I think we used it well. But we did have that money. It was clear that even then there was a group of young children in our academy. Probably, I would say, there was, at any given time, there were about sort of 30 or 40 who were just not coping. And then we looked around Hull, and we could see that there was the same problem across Hull. And there was only one real kind of provider. There was a PRU, which was very small, really, and there was a program called Smart Moves, which which helped as well, sort of relieve some of the pressure. But it was really straightforward, kind of situation for us, because we could see that it was either we are ultimately going to have to expel, exclude, sort of manage in some very unsatisfactory way as this kind of relatively small but not unnoticeable group of young people. And so we thought, right, well, we'll set up a school for them where we can have a completely individualized curriculum. Now, interestingly, the metrics around AP are that you don't really have to report your exam results, and you're not held to the same account in that you're not held to account in the same way. And the reason for that is because I think there is a recognition that a young person comes into an AP academy at point X in their career, and that you can't judge an academy for having had a child for only 1 year or 2 years in the same way that you can if they've been in for 5 years. And so that freedom meant that you could tailor a curriculum very individually to each individual person. So when we set up our AP Academy, the classes were, I believe, no more than 8. And the building that we designed ended up being, amusingly, the building was actually the heaviest building, or the densest building in Hull, I think, because it had thick walls, so that if a child got angry and hit a wall, the fist wouldn't go through it, but they would not want to do it again. It's not the wall. So the classes were small. There was a teacher and a teaching assistant to each class. Again, the funding for AP Academies really helped here. And very quickly, it turned out that there were at least 150 young people that needed this specialist sort of a treatment. Now, interestingly, this may sound a little bit provocative, but one of the things that we quickly found we could help with was a number of autistic young people who were being excluded because of their particular sort of neurodivergence, but who could cope in a much smaller, more kind of tailored setup. And it struck me that actually, we just sort of fast forward, I wonder how much government policy at the moment now, or a failure to address this sort of issue, is actually driving an increase in SEND across the piece. And so I know there's a huge crisis in SEND, and that's only got worse since I retired sort of 4 or 5 years ago. But it wouldn't surprise me if somebody researched this and found out that actually, the exigencies of Progress 8 are actually driving SEND, an increase in SEND. But anyhow, coming back to the AP Academy, we found that we could cater for a huge number of young people who would otherwise have been excluded, and that its success sort of proved the point to the point where we were opening up other centres. So we had a complete centre where we were teaching children with autism who would otherwise have been expelled for poor behaviour.
Andrew, that's. I mean, I obviously in the inclusion series we've just done, we've spoken to a number of people, and obviously that mainstream is not the answer to everybody, and that's there. But this, I'm with you. I think you're right. There is something about the system and the measurement of it that is driving certainly social, emotional, mental health issues for some. I mean, obviously those with physical, neurological issues, that is life, and that we need to deal with that. Diversity in its strength. I know, because in your book you refer quite a lot to what you refer to as VYPs, the vulnerable young people.
Yes.
And I get I wanted, because in terms of our chat before we spoke today, I wanted to sort of center on that idea of how we are labeling children and what does that do. And it got me thinking, as you were talking there about the AP, in the mainstream school, was the curriculum compliant with the Progress 8 kind of structure, or were you doing curriculum things across all of those organizations that were different and not maverick, but met the needs of the children? Because you talk about quite a lot about vulnerable young people being of you know, of all these labelled categories, and how damaging that can be, and dangerous it can be.
Right. Well, the simple fact is that after our particularly damaging inspection of 2016, we weren't able to do that because all the vocational qualifications went, and we had to make sure that our Progress 8 score was as high as it was. Now, actually, as high as it could be. Now, interestingly, I remember our Ofsted inspection was in May 2016 that caused us so many problems. In the summer of that year, our Progress 8 score was actually minus 0.3, which at the time was just at the bottom end of good. Actually, there were schools, in fact, schools that were getting minus 0.3 and still are today that were judged good. But Ofsted thought otherwise. No, we had to comply, and that was a very unhappy place to be. So BTECs had pretty much gone by that time. We no longer were able to early enter children for exams, and that was hugely successful. You know, giving somebody the chance to take an English or a maths exam early. that went. All of the extras that we thought were important for a rounded education that I mentioned when we were discussing the modern baccalaureate, those went, because it just became a race against time to cram as much information and to cram get as many GCSEs out of children. And what a horrible expression that is, to get something out of children like that. But that's what it felt like to me. Yeah. And I have to say that again, this was not because of any pressure particularly from our directors. They were hugely sympathetic to the situation we were in, but there was no alternative. The irony of it all was that at exactly the same time, our alternative provision academy was going from strength to strength, because it didn't have to follow progress. Didn't have to follow Progress 8, and so the children who were lucky enough to need alternative provision, I would argue, actually were probably getting a better deal than the children who were not quite struggling enough to need that education. So one of the things we looked at, and here's another thing that was just so disheartening. One of the things we looked at the time, and I stepped back from this, I have to say, out of fear, for reasons that will become apparent. But we looked at a sort of a hybrid solution around sort of 2017, whereby we would, for those children that weren't suited to AP all of the time, but could have benefited from some of it, we thought, well, why don't we enroll those on the AP Academy, and they will have a sort of a hybrid education, with some education delivered through the AP Academy, some education delivered through the mainstream academy, but they'll be on the roll of the AP Academy. Now, anyone who's been around for any time will know exactly where I'm going with this. And of course, the reason we didn't do it was because we thought we would then be sort of locked up into prison for off-rolling. And I look at the topic of off-rolling in my book, and I think that there was undoubtedly some poor practice at the time. I certainly don't want to sit here and throw stones at anybody, but we will all know of some practices of off-rolling. But this would have been a genuine attempt to try and actually give young people, particularly the more vulnerable young people, what they needed. But in the end, we thought we couldn't do it. So we looked at it and said, no, we can't do this, because the risk is that we will just be accused of off-rolling, and then we'll be in an even bigger mess. And, something I sort of learned was you can't beat the government. Actually, because governments govern. And so there we are.
So I yes, and come to that, and I guess that comes back to the question that what your ethic and the whole construction was built on that equity provision. That so it's not saying it's an equal provision, but it's right for the start point for all of those learners, and it was had a high aspiration to move them on. I think of that image of the, illustration of equity is the children looking over the fence. They all maybe all different size, but don't give them the same size box. Get them to the point where they're lifted, and that's what you were trying to do.
It was, and I think again, particularly, there is an obsession in this country which is quite unique about the results at 16, age 16, not 18. And what we knew was that it wasn't just a question of getting them to, getting them to 18 for the sake of further education. It was actually getting them to 18 so they didn't slip back into the estate. And we had this view of almost the personification of the estate, which would suck young people back in, either through crime or early and unwanted pregnancy or whatever. And actually what we needed to do almost at any cost was to keep them at least until till age 18 in our academy, because then they would stand a much, much better chance of actually going on to either higher education or employment and so on. And so, from the start, we had 18 as our goal, not 16. And I knew of other academies that did at the time, who had similarly innovative programs to us, but because the staging post of 16 is of such political importance in this country, they ran into problems as well, because they had a vision which went beyond that. And I think the vision for keeping young people in to age 18 is an important one, and that was completely new for our area.
Andrew, just listening to you resonate. I mean, it takes me back to my time there, and I know what you just referred to it. That the often unwanted pregnancies that particularly young ladies were going through, and I found that ethic of, well, okay, so this is a life-changing experience. You need to finish your education. Well, actually, our response was, you can still maintain your education process during this. You may not want to be in this circumstance, but it's not the end of life, and we need to keep working with you. And so we created also, in fact, to be honest, health and social care became quite a significant thing, and childcare actually became quite a centre of the school, because it was I'm sad to say it, but children of the school, or young people of the school's own children, being part of that experience. But it changed the climate, and it was, exactly as you say, it's that greater ambition. I wouldn't advocate that for every school, but it was certainly right in that circumstance. And that's where I think what you've said, that equitable provision is, one size isn't right for everybody. So, whatever high performing academic school out there is right for a cohort, but it's not right for everybody.
No.
And I think, Andrew, you've articulated, and we've talked, believe it or not, we've only got 10 minutes left, so we've talked, and it's great to talk to you. And again, I must say thanks for those people that are commenting. Please like and share if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn. Do just press the button and get involved in the conversation. And certainly, I'm enjoying the conversation with Andrew, because I know we share a lot of those similar goals and ambitions. Andrew, my sort of question at the end to most of the guests that come to us is, if there was one thing that you could change, what would it be? And I think you've touched on a number of things that we'd like to see changed. But in terms of what change do you think is significant for the next generation of teachers and young people?
Okay, I think there's three things I'd like to see happen, but sort of one of them is a product of the other two. The first thing is, I would genuinely love it. I think we're awaiting an interim curriculum review, aren't we, at the moment? I'm not quite sure what stage we're up to nationally, but
we're waiting. Yes,
we're waiting. That's what I thought.
There's bits that are coming out, but it's all story and mystery. So I'd wait for the final statement, because we'll know what we're dealing with.
I would absolutely love it. I would say, with all due respect and as humbly as I possibly can, I would really love it if Bridget Phillipson and her team had a long, hard think about giving head teachers who are highly paid, highly trained, highly professional people back the freedom to do what's best for their community. Now, actually, I don't want to say I was wrong-footed, but I sat down and wrote NAILED expecting a November 24 election, because I had a perhaps very vain hope that somebody on the what then seemed to be certain to be an incoming Labour government, that somebody in the team would read it and have a think about the philosophy behind the curriculum, rather than just looking at, treating the symptom, treating the cause of the malaise that all the problems we have in education, rather than just the symptom. And so the first thing I would say, and then of course I was wrong-footed because Rishi Sunak called an early election, Labour won a landslide, and I hadn't quite finished my book. So I then had to keep rewriting chapters. It's the one thing I hold against the Labour Party now, is that I've had to rewrite about 3 chapters of my book at least twice, as stuff has come out which I was talking about. And it's still almost a little bit behind because of that. But no, I would love it if the Labour team, curriculum team, and others would read and would actually read a bit of the book and have a think about the principles of equity and how we can encourage and enable school leaders to deliver equity, rather than just bang the drum yet again of which is so easy to do, about equality of opportunity, and bang on about PISA results. And we know that not every school takes part in PISA results, so I'm very skeptical of those statistics. So really to think about the philosophy behind the curriculum, and then how head teachers can be allowed to innovate again, because those were back in the day, about sort of 15, 20 years ago, those were days when actually we could really help young people far more than the curriculum that is in place at the moment. So that's the first thing. Please, if you're a government minister or a government advisor or a SPAD or anybody watching this, have a think about the philosophy that the measurements that you bring in will impose on people, because what gets measured gets done. Yeah. And I think we are utterly naive, and I think ministers are utterly naive if they think anything other than that. What gets measured will get done, because otherwise you're criticised for it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I really hope that the professional associations can get together and put real pressure on the government to do exactly that. Now, when I was writing my book, when I was researching my book, I did a trawl and I tried to find any evidence of a time when all the professional associations had agreed on anything other than pay conditions of service and COVID response. And I couldn't. Now, I'll be absolutely delighted, please, to be contradicted on this. And if it has been the case that the unions have in the past all got together and said, look, this is what a curriculum should look like, then my sincere apologies for not having picked that up. But I think that it's time for the unions to become quite robust with the government and say, look, it's not good enough to keep on imposing a metric which doesn't suit all people and which is probably making the problems we are trying to solve worse. And as I said earlier on, I expect is actually driving an increase in SEND. And the final thing I would say is, so that's a challenge to any people from the professional associations who are watching this. And the final thing I would say, if I could have one plea, is please, 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 can we just get rid of progress aid? It is not a suitable metric. It causes all sorts of problems. And I think that if that particular metric were to go and students were able to have, again, a more varied diet driven by principles which local head teachers were able to say were appropriate for their communities, then I think that would solve not all, but would certainly be a very good starting point for solving many of the problems that we find. And that's why I say that doesn't cost anything, other than, I suppose, the admin around putting in, a new system together, but it wouldn't cost schools anything. So that would be my great wish, or my 3 wishes.
And that, thank you, Andrew. I mean, we value what we measure what we value. you know, that's the sense of what you've just said. And I will say, you know, obviously the work that we do across the country, we're working with schools to build curriculum that's relevant to the children, and it's not all about national curriculum. It's not all about performance qualifications. And there are still technical awards that people are doing, and I find a number of leaders who think, you know, it's only GCSE, but of the 384 qualifications that are currently there are, I think it's 46 technical awards. But, you know, it's that, you know, we've got into this mindset, and I think that's what you're saying. We need to reevaluate that mindset. I think we need to take leaders in what's available. So I spend a lot of time, you know, going through that. You know, here's the list. Just look at the discount code, look at the list, and see what's there.
Yes.
But reality is, many leaders are then forced into a particular, you know, outcome process just simply because it's expedient. One, are there the teachers to teach the, you know, you refer to, you know, motor vehicles might well not be there now, but, you know, design technology is disappearing because we just can't find the teachers. Food tech, they're, you know, where are they? You as a linguist, you know, what's happening with languages, because the Germanists around London and East Anglia are very few and far between. So, you know, that comes back to your start, Andrew, is that your ethic to teach in those areas. But, you know, after 2 years, I know many that have said, no, this is too much. I can't do this. I'm going to do something else. But, you know, well done. And it sounds, I don't mean any way patronizing to say it, but just sticking at it. Well, you know, we got through, I think this year's my 40th year, and I think you've been about the same. So it's you know, you know, we've stuck in it, and we've got that. Why? Because we love working with young people, and we want to do the best for them. Andrew, I really appreciate the conversation this morning, and I hope, you know, we'll continue collaboration. I want to put your book back on the screen, if I may. So if you haven't seen it so far, please go and look at the ideas and the history that Andrew has laid out in the book Nailed. It's available now on Amazon and other booksellers, paperback. You can pick a version of it. Please do go and find the book. It will support Andrew and the work that he's doing. Andrew, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you. I know that the sort of messages we're getting on LinkedIn and YouTube are positive. Thank you for your input. And I know this is a very American expression, but thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done for the people of Hull and around there. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. It's been wonderful to come on the show, and likewise an honour and a privilege to be asked to speak on these issues. And thank you very much, and I look forward to carrying on the conversation with yourself on curriculum development. It's at the heart of every school, and it's an incredibly important conversation. So thank you ever so much for the conversation today, which I've really enjoyed.
Thank you. And your first podcast experience, and it's we got it all working in the end. So if you've been with us for the show, thank you very much for being here. We're back in 2 weeks' time with more conversations around curriculum and school design. Please do come back, I think, on the 14th of February. More information will be out on my profile about who's up next. I know we're working on the next conversation now. So please, thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Have a great day and great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.